In our last video, we uncovered the true history of Vault 111 while we escaped from it. As we walked away, we stepped over the skeletons of our own neighbors who were waiting at the fence, pleading with the military to let them into the vault. Most of them were vaporized here. But we notice that there are fewer skeletons here than we would expect. When we arrived at Vault 111, the gate was absolutely crowded. At least a dozen people piled in front of it and lining the sides. We find skeletons here, but not that many, and none on the side of the fence. We know they were standing here when the bombs dropped. We know they were dosed with high levels of radiation. What can explain this? Heading down the hill, we step over the footbridge and arrive back at Sanctuary to find it in utter ruin. It's hardly recognizable. Some of the houses are completely destroyed, but going through the ruins, we can piece the place back together in our minds. From the footpath by the bridge, if we turn north, we can inspect the first house. The mailbox has no name, but it was blue and the owners must have been pretty wealthy. We find a single-seater Chrysler Cherry Bomb sports car parked in the carport. Indeed, looking back 210 years, we see that same Rocket 69 in the carport, only this time it's faced the other direction, and we find the owners of the home clutching each other, standing right outside. We don't know their names. A theme which will become common in this video. We don't know the names of most of our neighbors, but we can identify a few of them, and we can even identify a few of their homes. This couple just stood here. They didn't run for the vault. They didn't hop in their car and try to leave. They were likely vaporized where they stood. Heading inside, we do find one suitcase on top of their Rocket 69. Perhaps after a moment of stunned silence, they ran inside to pack a bag, but by then it was too late. The ruins of Sanctuary have been well picked. We find a bunch of junk and scrap, but most pre-war riches are gone. However, if we look closely, we will find a few. Moving out from this couple's home, we arrive at our home, the House of Tomorrow. And to our astonishment, Codsworth is still here, 210 years later. Things have changed, but not that much. Our house is still blue, our black sedan is still parked in the carport, and Codsworth is still trimming hedges. From him, we learn only a little bit of the story of what went on here at Sanctuary while we were frozen.
They came into the vault. Maybe you saw them, armed, wearing strange outfits.
Only Miss Rosa's boy running around in his Halloween costume. More than a week early. I swear, the nerve of that woman leaving her brat unsupervised.
As part of the main quest, he takes us inside, gives us a box of sugar bombs, and then offers to go on a tour of Sanctuary with us. But we'll spend more time with Codsworth in another video. Our home, the House of Tomorrow, still has lots of junk inside, and on the counter we find the same Grognak the Barbarian comic book that made us chuckle 210 years ago.
Grognak the Barbarian and the Jungle of the Bat Babies. My favorite.
Moving towards the bedrooms, we find a family terminal. Well, not really. This terminal is from a mod I have installed called Cut Content Sanctuary Terminals by Seeking the Sun. You see, there was much more lore here at Sanctuary than was published in the finished version of the game. For some reason, Bethesda decided to cut a terminal that was in the Soul Survivors House of Tomorrow and another one we find here in Sanctuary. I covered the contents of this family terminal in the Soul Survivors House of Tomorrow in the video that I did about Nate and Nora, which you can watch here. But the interesting thing about the lore that was cut from the game is it doesn't really seem to conflict with the established lore of the game. In fact, there are other canonical references to the information we find in some of these terminals elsewhere in the game, so I'm not entirely sure why some of this content was cut. That's why I'm including it in this video. But I'll be sure to mention if it was cut content before I cover it. Since we covered the family terminal in my video on Nate and Nora, we can move on. We find Codsworth's General Atomics box in the laundry room, a unique set piece, and heading into Shawn's room, we find the UR Special book, lying beneath the diaper changing table. This is similar to the one we find inside Vault 101 during the events of Fallout 3. And by looting it, we can choose one new special point. Heading to Shawn's crib, we find one block beneath it, and the top of it showing the letter F. Is this foreshadowing? Is this trying to tell us what Shawn ultimately became?
I'm coming, buddy.
All of the clothing and military gear that was in our bedroom has long since been looted. Heading out to the carport, we see that our sedan is completely ruined, but at this point, the value of our car is the least of our concerns. Heading back to the road and continuing north, we find our next neighbor's house, whose mailbox is completely missing. Notice that it's a yellow house, has a ruined station wagon in the carport, and has Halloween decorations in the window. But 210 years ago, it was a blue house, it didn't even have a mailbox, and it had no Halloween decorations in the window, though it did have the station wagon, the four-door sedan. Heading inside, we see this was a festive family, lots of Halloween decorations all over, and we have to kill some bugs. Perhaps as the bombs were dropping, this family decided that they wanted to go out by declaring their love for Halloween. And so instead of hopping in the car, they grabbed their paper skeleton, their Happy Halloween banner, and draped it over the window. Oh, and then painted their house yellow. Inside, we don't find much until we head to the master bedroom. Here we find a novice-locked floor safe right next to the master bed. Now, despite my sarcasm just a moment ago, I suppose it is possible for these Halloween decorations to have been erected after the bombs. Note the big tray of candles we find on a dresser here. Perhaps these were pulled out in preparation to celebrate Halloween, or perhaps the people who lived in this house survived. And with power out, they pulled out a bunch of candles to see at night. Maybe in an attempt to have some sort of normalcy, they went on with their Halloween celebrations. Next, we move on to find a ruined blue house with another completely destroyed station wagon lying on the sidewalk. 210 years ago, we saw exactly the same scene. The station wagon was black back then, but it hasn't moved in over 200 years. Though we do notice a green four-door Chrysler Corvega parked in the carport, but now it's missing. Heading inside, we see that they were cigar smokers, my kind of people. There's a cab stashed by a toolbox in one nook, and we don't find much until we head to the office. Here we find an ammo canister next to a filing cabinet. Back outside, we do see that the carport is empty. So instead of hopping in the black sedan, the owners of the house hopped into their green Corvega in an attempt to flee. Heading round back, we see that a tree has fallen onto the roof of this house, providing a convenient ramp. And here we find a duffel bag. Then, if we head to the very back, we find a root cellar. Inside, we find a makeshift bomb shelter. This is the biggest stash of goods we find in Sanctuary. We find a chem box, some food, purified water, scrap all over the place, bars of gold beneath a shelf, and on an advanced locked box safe. We likely don't have the lockpicking skill necessary to pick this thing, but we can always come back. And if we pick it, we find randomized loot. Notice that we don't find a body or skeleton down here. Did the owner of this house even bother to use his fallout shelter? We'll learn the name of the person who lived here in just a minute. But continuing down the road on the left-hand side, we arrive at a cul-de-sac. We pass what was once a beautiful red picker-up truck, and that is the name of the truck. It's called the picker-up truck in the Fallout universe. It's on the sidewalk right outside a completely ruined yellow house. It's so destroyed, we can't enter it. However, once we take Sanctuary as a settlement, we can scrap this entire ruin, which provides us with a great deal of steel. 210 years ago, we see that same red picker-up truck outside. Though there were pink flamingos next to it back then, sad that we don't see them here. But aside from being ruined, the house then looks the same as it does now. Continuing around the cul-de-sac, we pass another beautiful Chrysalis cherry bomb. Man, were the residents of Sanctuary really well-to-do? Did they all need single-seater sports cars? But 210 years later, the Chrysalis cherry bomb is gone. It was parked on the sidewalk between this yellow house and this blue house, but someone must have driven it away. The blue house is utterly destroyed. We can see what it looked like before the war. No name on the mailbox, but it was indeed painted blue. Then, continuing around the cul-de-sac, we find another blue house, this one with more Halloween decorations outside. And in the grass in front of it, we find a tiny single-seater Zip. Hopping back in time, we see the Zip in the road right in front of the house, so it has moved slightly over 210 years. That could have been done by the atomic blast. But even though the house is blue, we don't see any Halloween decorations. Though I do suppose it's possible anyone could have put them up over the span of 210 years. This house we can enter, and inside we find more bugs. We find evidence that the owners of this house survived for at least a short time after the apocalypse, or that someone moved in here afterwards and tried to turn it into a home. All of the furniture has been arrayed into a barricade. There's a trifold American flag in a display case. Perhaps this was a veteran or a patriot. And we likely find the owner's corpse hunched over in the corner holding a pipe pistol. Evidence of the widespread violence and looting after the bombs. Perhaps he was killed by looters while he tried to defend his home. The master bedroom and bathroom are mostly empty, but when we head to the kids' room, we find a novice-locked floor safe under the crib. Interesting place to have a floor safe under your child's crib. Back out on the street, we can leave the cul-de-sac to explore the opposite side of the road. The next house we find is a ruined yellow house. Before the bombs, it looked much the same, only with pink flamingos just outside. Next down the street is a house we should all be familiar with. This is the house with the workshop, likely one of the first homes we decorate and turn into a player home. Even 210 years later, we know who lived here. The Rosa family. We find the name Rosa stamped on a mailbox outside. But here's where things get a bit confusing. Before the war, while inspecting the same house, we see it looks more or less the same, though the mailbox does not say Rosa. Outside this house, we find a terrified couple. One would think that this was the Rosa family, but as we'll learn, this can't be. Why they're huddled together on the grass outside the Rosa home is a mystery that remains to be solved. Parked in the carport is a tiny Zip, but it's gone by the time we arrive here 210 years later. Instead, it looks like someone had tried to turn this into a home or workshop. Even though they're not there before the war, we find a power armor station, an armor workbench, and a weapons workbench, not to mention the workshop. Inside, we find that the house has mostly been picked through. In the master bedroom, we find a suitcase on a dresser, evidence of a hasty retreat. And on a metal dresser, we find a terminal. Restoration Project Terminal. This is the other terminal I mentioned that was completely cut from the game. So everything we're about to read was cut from the game and therefore is not necessarily canonical. However, as we'll learn, some of what we read here is established as canonical lore by other sources, which were published in the finished game. We will cruise America. We find a number of options in the first one, progress. Kind of crazy to think how far Lewis and I have come these past 4 months, and I'm not just talking about the car. I hate getting all poetic, but rebuilding this Corvega really has helped rebuild our relationship. He still misses his dad. God knows we both do. But he's learning that his madre ain't so bad. As for the Corvega, most of the bodywork is done, generally speaking. Might not be pretty yet, but it's there. The interior needs new upholstery. Lewis insists on leather. We'll see. As for the engine, ugh, estoy perdido. I'm trying, but there's only so much I can learn from books without any real training. I'm going to have to bite the bullet and talk to the folks at Red Rocket. We learned from the mod author that he included everything in this terminal as he found it in the game files, including the typos. So the typos aren't his fault. But this brings us to the issue about who actually is the Rosa family. We learned from this terminal that the people who lived here were a widow and her son. That's very different from the adult couple we find clutching each other in fear right outside the door. Now, every character in the game has a script, and that script has a file name. It just so happens that some of the otherwise nameless neighbors in the game have scripts labeled Rosa and Rosa's son. These two neighbors appear to be a single mother and her young son. We find them running from Sanctuary after the news breaks. However, they don't come from this house. They come from the direction of the cul-de-sac. But it is these two individuals who have the scripts named Rosa and Rosa's son. Even if we discount this terminal, in the published version of the game we do find the Rosa mailbox outside this house, not a house further down in the cul-de-sac. Hence the problem. This car restoration project that Rosa and her son were doing is canonical, despite this terminal being cut. We just read that she was going to ask some advice from the mechanics at the nearby Red Rocket. And sure enough, if we go there, we find a terminal. And on the terminal, an entry titled The Rosa Restoration. That Rosa widow in Sanctuary Hills is restoring an old classic Corvega with her son. Nice woman. Pretty. Kid seems like kind of a brat, but I guess that's the point of her doing this project with him. Anyway, she's been doing a hell of a job. I was amazed at how much her and the kid have been able to do on their own. The only reason she even came to me is because the engine is out of her depth. I'm sure we can help her out. This is why I decided to include the terminal. All it does is provide better context to established canonical lore that we already know. In the next one, needed parts, exhaust manifold, a completely rebuilt engine, adios mio, Christless exhaust system, 2073 or later, a coolant tank, seat belts. Lewis wants a roll cage. I don't know how fast he wants to go, but I promise him we'll at least achieve the baseline 0 to 60 in 0.5 seconds. Okay, exactly what Corvega Christless was this? Christless was the name of the company that made the Corvega line of cars, but there were many Corvega models within that line. Let's keep reading to find out. In the next one, Las Drogas need more buff out. Supply is drying up. If Hawthorne can't get me more, I'll have to try to score some down in Charleston, but I can't leave the car there with all that crime. Buff out? So the widow Rosa was addicted to buff out? Why would she need buff out? Perhaps she needed it to do all of the manual labor on the car that she and her son were building. Tragic to think that she would develop a drug problem just to get closer to her son. And the next one, atomic alternator. Atomic alternator failed again. I told Lewis that only a factory is equipped to rewind the azimuthal coupled plasma loops. I wonder if the same containment could hold a fusion reaction. Whew, that was a whole lot of, I don't know. Car repair was certainly complicated in the Fallout universe. And in the final one, note to Lewis. Lewis, I'm not here. I took the car. Did you see the new hot rodder? There's an article on how to mod the core reactor. I went to a garage east of Quincy to change the reactor from fission to fusion. We won't have to work about the fuel shortages again. I think she meant worry about the fuel shortages. And I think we begin to understand why Bethesda chose to cut this terminal. There's a lot of very specific stuff about how vehicles worked in the Fallout universe. Changing the reactor from fission to fusion is huge. Instead of splitting atoms with fission, they would be merging atomic nuclei with fusion. Fission would produce a ton of nuclear waste, but fusion would produce far more energy than a car could ever consume. That and the mention of the azimuthal coupled plasma loops, we begin to get a description of how the vehicles work in the Fallout universe. Kind of makes you scratch your head. Perhaps that's why they cut the terminal. They didn't want to set in stone something that wouldn't make any sense. Finally, she mentions the fuel shortages, but in the Fallout universe, there were fossil fuel shortages. But she just said that it had a fission reactor, which is a nuclear reactor. So if the fuel shortages were fossil fuel shortages, she would only worry about it for her vehicle if her vehicle ran on petrol, oil, fossil fuels. But it had a nuclear reactor, a fission reactor. So why would she be worrying about the fuel shortages? At any rate, she ends by saying that she brought their Christless Corvega to a garage east of Quincy. We should be able to find that. And indeed we do. The garage east of Quincy is none other than the Red Rocket truck stop owned by the Atom Cats. And if we move into the garage, sure enough, what do we find? A Christless Corvega 2-door sports coupe. Still propped up on the lift. The tires have long ago been stripped, but the car itself remains. Backing out of the terminal, we can leave the Rosa house. Heading down the street, the next house on the left is a completely ruined blue house with no car in the carport. Notice that it has an orange door lying on the ground. 210 years ago, however, it had a glass door. And taking a look at the carport, we find the owners of this home frantically trying to pack their car for a trip to the sea.
We'll drive to the coast! That's gotta be far enough!
What if it isn't?
But their car is gone. Did they make it? As we turn to move on to the next house, we learn that no, they didn't. Here their sedan sits in the middle of the road, a completely rusted wreck, and they were likely vaporized when the bombs dropped. Continuing down the road, we find the final house on this side of the road, a small blue house with a yellow sedan station wagon parked in the carport outside. But 210 years ago, this was a small yellow house with a 4-door green Corvega parked in the carport outside. But looking down, we find the mailbox embedded in the dirt. This home belonged to Mr. Russell. To make matters more confusing, we actually find 2 mailboxes outside this house. This one embedded in the dirt with Russell's name on it, and another one right next to the mailbox stand that had some ammunition in it. If we go across the street, we do see a mailbox stand, but no mailbox. You would think the Russell mailbox belongs to the one across the street, since the one with the ammunition was closer to the stand by this house. However, as we'll find out later, this one is indeed Russell's house. So we must presume that the one that had the ammunition in it is the one that belonged to the house across the street. We met Mr. Russell in my video on Vault 111. He was one of the sanctuary residents who, like our family, was registered for the vault. We know why his car remained in the carport, because he fled to the vault. He was admitted and placed into a pod, whereupon he died. But since he's gone, we can explore his house. After killing some rad roaches inside, we can move to the bedroom, where we learn that he was a bit of a fisherman and a fan of Captain Cosmos. Well, I can understand. I suppose Captain Cosmos is so cool that a man of any age can enjoy it. And if we look closely, we find an advanced locked floor safe hiding amongst some rubble beneath his dresser. If we come back later to pick it, we can walk away with a tidy stash of randomized loot. Out of the house and back to the street, we find the footbridge leading out of town partially blocked by a ruined red 4-door Corvega. This is a little confusing, as it's pointed away from the town as if someone was trying to drive away. But we don't find a 4-door red Corvega anywhere in the town before the bombs dropped. There is a bit of a traffic jam consisting of a military vehicle, a green 4-door Corvega, and a blue 2-door sports coupe in front of one of the yellow houses just before the path that leads to Vault 111, but we don't see a red Corvega anywhere. Near to this, we find the sign to Sanctuary Hills. It has aged, it's rusted and covered in ivy. But strangely enough, we find no sanctuary sign before the bombs dropped. There's nothing here. That's because we were never supposed to see this. If you try to get this far at the beginning of the game, the bombs immediately drop. You're never able to reach it. I was only able to get here by toggling the free cam to discover that the sign was not missing. But we were never supposed to see this. Moving on to the other side of the street, the first house before the bridge on this side is a completely ruined yellow house with a blue 4-door Corvega lying on its front lawn. Before the bombs dropped, it was much the same. A small yellow house, though no Corvega, no garage, and no carport, which means the car must have belonged to someone else. It may have been the Corvega in that traffic jam, though that one was green before the war and this one is blue. Continuing up the road, we find a yellow house and a name on the mailbox: Hawthorne. Hawthorne was mentioned by Rosa in the cut terminal we found in her house, so Hawthorne is canonical. Before the war, there was no name on his mailbox, though he did live in a yellow house. Heading inside the Hawthorne residence, we don't find much till we move to the bathroom. Here we find another 10mm pistol. Should be the third or so that we've found if we looted all of the ones in Vault 111. Moving into the kids' bedroom, we see a giddy-up Buttercup poster on the wall and, disturbingly, a syringe of Med-X. How much pain were these kids in to need Med-X? Then, moving into the master bedroom, we see a booby-trapped floor box safe. There is a tension trigger on the side, attached to a makeshift bomb on top of the safe. But once disarmed, we can unlock the novice-locked safe for a tidy stash of goods. Near to this is a novice-locked ledger terminal on the desk, and this is not part of the mod. This terminal was published with the game, and therefore it's canonical. We're in the business of happiness. We see 4 entries in the first Sanctuary Hills. Here we find some names. In the first, DiPierto, totally high-strung and needs to relax. I keep telling him that, offering to help, but so far, no dice. By the looks of the guy, he's self-medicating with pie. Oh, so he's a bit of a glutton, which is strange, because we meet DiPierto, not before the war, but after the war. If we explore the other pod room, we read his name on a terminal. Then if we move to the corresponding pod, we find his frozen remains. Strangely enough, he doesn't look particularly portly, so I don't understand Hawthorne's comment in his terminal. Backing out and moving down, Baker. My favorite tinfoil hat-wearing nutjob. Good for 7 ampules of day tripper a week. Guess he's a one-a-day kind of guy. Whatever helps the man groove. The bit about a tinfoil hat made me think that it might be the guy with the fallout shelter beneath his house, but we learn in a moment that it's not, so I don't know who Baker is. In the next one, Rosa. Still trying to get her some buff out. Didn't expect the rationing to affect this, but it is what it is. So this makes Rosa's buff out addiction canonical. Next, we find Jahani. He wants something called Psycho. I'm not sure the stuff even exists, and if it does, do I really want this Neanderthal using it? Guess it depends on how much he's willing to spend. I'll put some feelers out to my army connection, see where that goes. We never find anyone in the game named Jahani, but if we take a look at the names of the cells in Sanctuary using the creation kit, we discover that the name of the bunker cell has his name, Jahani, in it, which likely means that this bunker and the house above it belonged to Mr. Jahani. Jahani, whom we otherwise never find in the game. And the next one, Russell, they still owe me for that last Excel delivery. Occurred to me, was it even for them? Because, so help me God, if I find out they're juicing up those dogs, we are going to have words about more than the money. But we're probably beyond words anyway. I know they have a floor safe in there. I've seen it. Master bedroom, under the dresser. Can't be that tough to crack. So wait a minute. He's cool with giving XL and other chems to humans, but the idea of giving the same drugs to dogs offends him? I mean, yeah, you are drugging a dog. The dog can't exactly say no. Sure, there is all that. But I think an addicted human being, completely dependent upon your business, is a bit worse than an addicted dog. But this Hawthorne guy is a real piece of work, as we'll learn in a bit. Though this terminal entry is a tad confusing. We've been to the Russell house. This is the terminal entry that proves that the Russell mailbox belongs to this house. And as Hawthorne says, there was a floor safe under the dresser. But in this terminal entry, he refers to the occupants of the Russell house in the plural. They still owe me. Was it even for them? But as we learned from exploring Vault 111, Mr. Russell came by himself. There was no Mrs. Russell. Now, it's possible that maybe he was living with a girlfriend, and as a non-family member, she wasn't allowed in the vault. Sure, there are any number of explanations, I suppose, as to why Hawthorne refers to them, even though we know only Mr. Russell came from this house. Maybe by they he was referring to Russell and the dogs. After all, if we inspect Russell's backyard, we do indeed find a doghouse. That's it for Sanctuary residents. He had quite a few people of this town hooked on his drugs. I wonder if the sole survivor ever knew. But his business reached far beyond Sanctuary Hills. And the next one, Concord. We find 3 names in the first O'Keefe. Still good for a couple of hits of Daddy-O a week. Pretentious pseudo-intellectual asshole. But his money's good. Hard to be picky of your clientele when you need the cash. In the next one, Williams wants Med-X. As much as I can get. Hasn't told me why, not really my business. Guessing there's some sort of long-term pain management going on. Disease? Med-X is the painkiller of the Fallout universe. I suppose I have more empathy for someone hooked on Med-X than anything else. And in the final one, Anders, kids are usually a no-go. But this girl's got style, and she's not interested in getting tweaked. Ordered 20 blood packs. Some Halloween stunt or something. Or hell, maybe she's really a vampire. What do I care? She's got her daddy's money. So Hawthorne was dealing drugs to kids, and he's getting upset at Russell or the Russells for potentially giving XL to dogs? Though, to be fair, he was selling her blood packs. I mean, blood packs are basically just bags of blood, right? Not really an addictive chem, and indeed you can't even get addicted to blood packs in the game. At any rate, next, we move on to Boston. Here we find 4 entries in the first Isaacs. Some student at CIT wants Day Tripper, XL, and an entire pallet, yes, pallet, of Mentats. Not sure if he's doing crazy experiments, dealing to other eggheads, or on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Don't care, so long as the money's good. CIT, the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, the very same organization that, after the bombs dropped, evolved into the Institute. Looks like many of the students before the war were depending upon Mentats to get through their courses. I wonder how many Institute scientists, 210 years later, still depend upon the chem. In the next one, Ward, young married couple. Good for a couple of day tripper per week. Easy order, cool people, a no-brainer. Then McDermott, cop. Longtime buff-out customer. Running into supply problems. We've had a good thing for years. I'd hate it to end now, and I don't exactly want to risk him getting all noble and law-abiding if he can't get what he wants. That would end very badly for me. Well, we learned from Rosa's cut terminal, and then again from Hawthorne's terminal here, that it was tough getting a hold of buff-out before the war. Some sort of supply problem, government restriction. I looked into all of the cops we learn about from the terminals at the various police departments in the game, and I didn't find a McDermott, so not exactly sure who he is. And finally, Sapolsky. the old lady has upped her daddy-o order. Weird, but profitable. That's it for Boston. Backing out, we can finally explore miscellaneous. In the first, Malcolm, potential new customer in Charleston, wants medics. Seems oddly desperate. Might be a cop trying too hard. Need to move slowly. The only Malcolm we know about from before the war was Malcolm and his twin brother Eugene, whom we find at Reeb Marina. I covered their story in my video on Reeb Marina that you can watch here. But Reeb Marina was not in Charleston, so I don't think this can be the same guy. And finally, Duchenne, underwear model from Baintree. Beautiful, intelligent, totally weird. All she's ever wanted is stim packs. 10 plus per week. My imagination continues to run wild. Whoa. Could she be... Was she trying to... maybe it's better if I don't speculate on this one. I'll just leave it alone. Moving on. Backing out of the terminal, we can leave the Hawthorne residence and explore the final home of Sanctuary Hills. This belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Abel. It was a blue home with a carport. At least we can enter it after the bombs. But before the bombs, they had a blue station wagon sedan parked in the carport and a lone wanderer motorcycle on the sidewalk just outside, next to some abandoned suitcases. What's strange about this is Mr. and Mrs. Abel were both vault residents. We met them inside Vault 111, where they were both placed in cryopods and killed. Why then the motorcycle outside their home? Well, perhaps they were going on a joyride together before they learned about the bombs. Or perhaps in their minds the vault was a last resort, and their initial plan was to just drive to the mountains or to the sea. Hence the motorcycle and the suitcases. But why then 210 years later are both the sedan and the Lone Wanderer motorcycle gone? It's obvious that they didn't use them, they were in the vault. I suppose this means that some wastelander or scaver came by to salvage them for parts. But why they salvaged these two vehicles and not all of the others we've seen strewn about Sanctuary remains a mystery. Inside the Abel home, we find a Nuka-Cola cherry inside the refrigerator, a novice-locked suitcase on top of the dresser, and a chem box on the bathroom windowsill. But that is not the end of the story to Sanctuary Hills. The final chapter comes in a random encounter. Mr. Donahue? Mr. Parker? Mrs. Parker? Mrs. Sumner? Mr. Sumner? Mrs. Donahue? You and I have no reason to recognize these names, but the sole survivor would. These are the ghouls of some of the sole survivors' neighbors. With the exception of the Donahues, we never learn their names from the actual game. But if we take a look at their script file names using the creation kit, we learn that Mr. and Mrs. Donahue were the couple in the suit and the summer shorts standing by the gate to Vault 111.
Don't get in!
Are you in the vault program? They're not letting anyone else in. Sign up. They're gonna leave us here to be bombed. Why don't they just let us in?
They can't treat us like this. I'm an American citizen. You can't just leave us out here. They have no right to keep us out.
Mr. and Mrs. Sumner were the couple in the pink and checkered shirt and the white summer's dress, whom we saw running from Sanctuary towards the vault when the bombs dropped.
You can't get us in the vault, can you? Can you? Oh my God, we're gonna die out here. Oh God, no.
The house doesn't even have a basement. Where are we supposed to go? Tell me. God. They're just going to leave us here. What are we supposed to do?
Mr. and Mrs. Parker were the couple in the sweater vest and slacks and laundered cream dress, also standing outside the gate to Vault 111.
Why don't they let us in? Who cares if we're on some list? We're gonna die out here. Don't they get that? Oh my God.
They'll let us in. They have to. They have to. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Oh God. Oh God.
If you're not registered, you're not getting in.
And even though you didn't see me kill them, my companion must have, we do find the ghouls of both Rosa and her son Louis.
We're not in the program. Oh God. They're not going to let us.
Keep it orderly.
I have a child with me. Oh God. They're just going to leave us here to die. What's going on? Why is everyone yelling?
Mom's really upset. I keep telling her it'll be okay. I want to go home.
At last, the comment Codsworth made about Rosa's son begins to make sense.
Only Miss Rosa's boy running around in his Halloween costume more than a week early.
He thought Lewis was wearing a Halloween costume, but instead Lewis had grown into a ghoul. This is why there were so few skeletons outside the fence of Vault 111. This is why the entire side of the fence, where we find many of these characters before the war, was empty. They didn't die in the blast. They were highly irradiated, turned into feral ghouls, and have been wandering around Sanctuary and Boston itself for 210 years. And that is the full story of Sanctuary Hills and the people who once lived here. Of course, much later, Sanctuary becomes the final destination of the refugees from Quincy, led by Preston Garvey. But that is another story for another day. What are your thoughts on Sanctuary Hills? Did you turn it into a settlement in your game? Did it become one of your primary settlements? Or did you move on to explore other places? Do you think Rosa and her son Lewis's terminal should be considered canonical? Or since it's cut content, can we not trust anything that's inside of it? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I publish many videos each and every week here on my channel, so if you don't want to miss my next episode, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. If you have and you feel like you're still not getting notifications, consider following me on Twitter at Oxhorn. I update Twitter manually whenever I publish any new content. I have a shirt shop with completely unique designs that you can't find anywhere else. My designs come in a variety of men's, women's, and children's sizes and in a wide array of colors. You can find them on other products as well, like smartphone cases, pillows, posters, mugs, stickers, prints, etc. So if interested, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with more brand new videos.